All right, so we're going to be looking at Judges today, and I'm excited. This is my second opportunity. We'll have one last opportunity to look at Judges next week as well. And Greg mentioned the battles, and there are a lot of battles in the Old Testament, and I remember as a boy, that was one of the things that spoke to me most. You know, people killing each other, ending each other's lives, that really, whew. Although, at our backyard gathering, which many of you perhaps missed, Jake made a good observation that the narration on the battles is not the most in-depth. It's usually they were there, they fought, and that was the end. So we're going to be looking at Judges chapter 10 today. But before I go there, I want to share a couple thoughts from last time, and it will tie into this time that I think are important. First, I want to share a story about a friend of mine from college. A group of us were standing around in our dorm room, and we were talking about quizzes and tests. Now, at my school, they did online quizzes and tests. So you could go home and take the quiz and the test on your own time, online, in your room, which was nice, because if you've got a busy schedule, you're working, it just made it easier. What it did raise was the opportunity to cheat, right? So you can log into your quiz, your test, with your notes open and just fill in the information. There was always a question at the end, or a statement, I did not receive any extra help in this quiz, but it's still on the honor system. And my friends and I, we were standing around and talking about that, and somebody said, well, if you're here at seminary and you're cheating, like, what are you doing? And all of us were like, yeah, just very self-righteously. As if I could never struggle with that. A friend of mine came to me later, and he said, so you remember that conversation? Well, I've actually been cheating for quite some time, and I'm talking to my professors about it in the classes that I was cheating, and I'm talking to the dean of students, and my friend went to all of the authorities voluntarily. He went to each of his professors that he had been cheating in those classes. He talked to the school leadership, and so they met with him for many months. But what was really neat about what he did was that willingness to say, no, the cheaters aren't these bad people out there, it's me. It's me, I am the cheater. And I respected him for doing that a lot. And something that can be very easy for us when we're looking at stories like Judges, where we're going to see a lot of brokenness, a lot of bad decisions, a lot of sinfulness, it can be easy for us to externalize the evil, meaning evil is out there. Evil is in those people out there. Just like what we are doing. The cheaters are those bad people out there. That could never be me. And I want to encourage us, when we are looking at these stories, today the story is going to end with a pretty horrific ending. Don't look at our friend here and think, man, that guy is the worst. I could never be like that. Let us see these characters and realize, without God's grace, that could have been me. Without God's grace, that could be me at any point. So let us be quick to say, you know what? I might be the bad guy. I might do this very same thing. So something else with this is when we look at Judges and we see these characters, and not just Judges, the Old Testament is filled with failed examples. You can look at Judges. You can look at the Kings. You can look at Abraham. Abraham is this great character. The man went to Egypt, was afraid that someone was going to kill him so that they could take his wife, so he pretended like his wife was his sister, which then means his wife is now a single woman and can be married off. Like, that's not great. I don't think Kennedy would appreciate if I would rather save my life and let her get married off to some other guy. There can be some wrong responses with that. We can look and say, why is the Bible teaching this? It's not. There can also be the response of, man, I'm really disappointed with these role models that you give us. When we see these broken characters, the Bible does not brush over these characters. These characters should leave us with a taste for something better. So when we look at these kings, these deliverers who fail epically, this should leave us looking for something that's better. I want to see a better king. I want to see a better deliverer who is better than these guys. And that is ultimately fulfilled in whom? You can answer this one. Jesus, yes. So when we look at these characters, all of these failures should point us to the need for something better. They do great things, but they fall short because they are, just like you and me, broken humans. And we make the wrong decisions so often. All right, so talking about Judges. Judges is in a unique spot in the story of the Bible. Perhaps you were here last week, perhaps not. Directly before Judges, you have these heroic times. You've got the patriarchs, you've got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, you've got Joseph, you've got the Exodus, Moses, Joshua, these like amazing, cool things, super exciting things happening. Okay, that's before. You've got Joshua punching into the promised land, getting the people settled in Canaan. Then afterward, you have the kings. So you have David and Solomon and all these different rulers where Israel is starting to become a player on the world stage, or the local world stage. But then you have judges. They don't have an ethnic identity. They don't have a national identity. They don't have a good ruler. They're just kind of there. And so what this leads to is the phrase, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And it leads to a pretty dark period. So when you look at Judges, there's a lot of really dark stories. In this, there is a cycle. Now, some of you, when you hear the cycle of Judges, you'll be like, come on, again? But it is really important, where the people are at a period of rest, and then, as we tend to, when things are going well, they get apathetic and they go after other gods, the gods of their neighbors. Then, because God wants to bring them back in, he uses discipline to bring them back in. He allows a foreign power to come in and oppress them, to which they cry out, help, save me! He raises up a deliverer and brings them back into that period of rest. Sound like anyone familiar? Today we're going to be looking at a second character, and we're going to make some observations, and that is the character of Jephthah. It's going to be an interesting gentleman. So, let's look at chapter 10. We're going to get some background that happens before Jephthah's character shows up, and then we will dive into his life. So, Judges 10, verse 6. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. And they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and into the hands of the Ammonites. So there we go. We have two steps in our cycle there. They are at that great place where they had a good judge, and now they are turning to other gods, and so he allows them to be taken over by a foreign power. So that's where we are in this cycle. Verse 10. The people of Israel cried out to the Lord, saying, we have sinned against you because we have forsaken our God and have served the Baals. Now God's response here is kind of funny. The Lord said to the people of Israel, did I not save you from the Egyptians and from the Ammonites and from the Amorites and from the Philistines, the Sidonians also, the Amalekites, the Maonites oppressed you, and you cried out to me, and I saved you from their hand, yet you have forsaken me and served after other gods. Therefore I will save you no longer. Go and cry out to the gods whom you have chosen. Let them save you in your time of distress. So I think his response is here, hey guys, I was taking care of you. I saved you from all these other people. I was giving you everything you wanted, and you still went after all these other people. So I really think I'm getting in the way of your needs and your desires. So I'm just going to step out and let you and your other gods, you guys can do your thing. I'll do my thing. You guys can do your thing. I'll let them save you because I don't want to get in the way of you and your relationship with them. I can almost see like a little sarcasm in his response and be like, you guys didn't want me when things were going well, and now that things aren't going well, now suddenly I'm your best friend. I think I've talked to kids a number of times and be like, there's a person that was my best friend, and then suddenly they were not my best friend and they were talking about me, and then later on they were my best friend again. Poor guy. He'll make it. He will make it. So they put away their gods, and the end of chapter 10 ends with the Ammonites looking for somebody who can lead them against for the Israelites, looking for someone who can lead them against the Ammonites. So who's going to be our savior? Who's going to be our deliverer? So that brings us to our character of Jephthah. Chapter 11. Let's look at this guy's character, his background, and then we will see his story. make a couple observations, and then close. Verse 1, now Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, which is really cool. He was not like Gideon hiding in a hole in the ground. He was not like Deborah who's hanging out underneath a tree and Barak who's afraid. This guy's like ready to go. But he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah, and Gilead's wife also bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out of the house and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. So, here's our character, Jephthah. He's a mighty warrior. He's living out in the wilderness. He's got like a band around him, but he's the son of a prostitute. And I don't think the author here is commenting on his moral value because of that, but rather the negative cultural associations that would go. This is not a guy that's like walking around, he's the hero of the people. Right? So he is clearly unpopular, and his stepbrothers, when they all grow up, they drive him out. Now, just an interesting thing. This guy, we'll see, has a lot to offer. But he goes out and it says worthless fellows collected around him and went out with him. I imagine that these were all people who had similar stories to him, who were in positions where they did not belong. And often we look around and we see people like, why are you guys choosing that life? Like people who choose to live lives of violence or whatever. And I wonder if some of these folks are like Jephthah, where if folks like us, who maybe have a good family, who are stable, would show care for those people who don't belong, if that would keep them from ending up in this place that Jephthah has. Like imagine if his brothers hadn't chased him out. Would he have been in the same spot where he's out in the wilderness and these guys are gathering around him? I don't know. But it's an interesting thought. God is going to use all of these negative things, though, to work something awesome through Jephthah. So, verse 4, let's continue. Gilead is now going to come after, the people of Gilead are going to come after Jephthah. After a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead, this is where Jephthah was from, went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said, "Come and be our leader, that we may fight against the Ammonites." But Jephthah said to the elders, "Did you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? Why then have you come to me now when you are in distress?" So I love his response. His response is almost identical to what God gave to the Israelites in the chapter before. Guys, I literally was there already with you, and you chased me out. And now that things are going badly, now you want my help? I feel used, taken advantage of, which is true. A thought that I should have said earlier, just a reminder, these points where we are facing something that is more powerful than us, something that is out of our control, that is not a fun place to be. I don't like feeling powerless. I don't like facing events that I can't control. But often what that does bring is it reminds me that I'm not as powerful as I would like to be. Right? When you've got a child that will not turn off at home and you can't find the turn off button. It's also a reminder that we need help. Right? And that is an excellent response, that when we are facing these periods of time where we do feel helpless, where events are out of our control and we're reminded that I'm not as powerful as I would like to be, those are the best times when often we are driven to our knees and say, "God, you got me. I can't do this. I need you." So the people come to Jephthah. He knows that they're just using him for his military abilities. So he's going to wager a little bit with them. He says in verse 9, "If you bring me home again to fight against the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head, your ruler." So this is understandable. Jephthah's response is, if you want me, then I'm going to be your ruler. But I love that when we look at this guy, and I think this is a very understandable response. I'm not just going to serve you for the sake of it. But I think you can also see that his desires are not, I'm going to fight for the Lord's glory. This is, I'm going to fight so that I can be your ruler. We're just painting this picture of a guy that is not much different from you and I. All right, so Jephthah, he's a mighty warrior. He's chased out. The people come, say, Jephthah, we need your help. So now he's their ruler. He's the boss now. So let's see how he takes this over. He's going to basically go through this in 2 steps. First, we're not going to read these verses, but 12 through 28. You can read that on your own time. Jephthah's not going to start with violence. He's going to start with diplomacy. I actually think this is really neat. Cool part to be included in this story. He sends a messenger out to the Ammonites, and he asks, why are you guys fighting? Which is a smart thing to do. And their response is, because you took away a bunch of our land a long time ago, and so would you restore it to us peaceably? So I think it's just kind of neat that you have like these correspondence going back and forth, and we get to kind of read what's happening. Jephthah's response is, far, far away in a galaxy. So he goes all the way back, and he shares with the king of Ammon the story of the Exodus, the story of the conquest, basically building an argument that, hey, God promised us this land, and so we are living in it. If your God promised you land, would you give that up? It's a question that he asks, which I just think that's a very honorable start for the guy as a leader. I think it's really neat to see that we get to, this is included in the story. But now we're going to come to the part of Jephthah's story that I think is most defining of the guy, and the part that will change his life forever. So verse 29. Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. Okay, so he went to a bunch of places. And Jephthah said, he made a vow to the Lord, and he said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. So, Jephthah says, God, if you give me the victory, then when I get home, the first thing that comes out, I will offer it as a burnt offering. Okay, so he's taking a risk here because it could be like a cricket or something. It could be a cow or something expensive. And we'll see how this works out for him. But I want to pause, and I want us to see the transactional nature of how Jephthah is viewing his relationship with God. So transactional, meaning, God, we're going to do a little trade here. You give me the victory, and I will give you whatever comes out. That's our exchange. That's our exchange. And it would seem that ancients often viewed their relationship with the gods in that way. There was a story from the Greeks that they were going to sail to a faraway city, and they had a whole bunch of ships, and they were ready to sail across the ocean. So they got in their ships, they jumped in, and suddenly a whole bunch of waves came and wrecked a bunch of their ships. Not great. So they hightailed it back to the shore where they felt safe. They must have made the god Poseidon angry. So the king sacrificed his daughter to the god of the sea. And then the seas were calm. So that is a different culture who also viewed this same transactional nature. I will give you this human, and this is the most important gift I could give you, and you will give me safe passage across the sea. Okay, let's not be too hard on Jephthah here, because I think we can do the same thing today. I remember being told as a single guy many times, maybe not many times, maybe the reason why God hasn't given you a wife yet is you haven't surrendered fully. Maybe there's a part of your life that God is waiting for you to give over to him, and when you do, then a wife will come along. Okay, there is merit, I think, in saying that maybe God is sparing a woman from you right now in your current state. I think there's merit to that. But you see what is that teaching me? that my relationship with God is based upon what I can do or what I am doing. And he's holding this thing until I've paid enough into this wife fund. That because you haven't surrendered, that he's going to be like, no, you do not deserve this. Folks, we can have the same transactional view of God. Maybe we're not offering sacrifices to people and viewing it that way. But I think we can view our relationship with God in that same transactional nature. Man, Lord, I am trying my best. Why are you allowing suffering in my life? I'm doing a pretty good job. Or, man, I've failed, so now I'm going to expect to be zapped, to be punished for this. A reminder, Job and his friends struggle with this. If you have a chance to read the book of Job, it is in the Old Testament, it's a little bit later. Job goes through a lot of suffering. He loses so much, and then he and his friends spend the next 35 chapters discussing suffering and how God works. Their view is the same thing. That if you do right, then things are going to be perfect for you. Things are going to be great because God owes it to you. And if you do wrong, then God is going to zap you because he's really angry with you. Okay, 2 parts with that. Let us remember first that God pours sunlight and rain on the righteous and the unrighteous alike. Both when we are honoring him in a day and when we are just sinful and rebellious, he lets the sun shine on us. I might be the kindest guy and rain will come on my grass and let it grow. I might be the grumpiest guy and that same rain will come on my grass and let it grow. We are blessed to have a God that does not deal with us according to our works. I think there is merit to blessing coming from doing what is right, but that's not because God owes it to us. It's because he's better than you and I. He's more good than you and I. He's kinder than you and I. But something also, our standing before God. Everything has been paid. We are already in perfect standing with him because of the work of Jesus. That's why that's so important. Because of what Jesus has done, it's not just to save us from our sins. It's also that we are in right relationship with him. So he looks at you, if you are a follower of Christ, with pleasure, with happiness, with joyfulness. The way that a parent looks at a child, better than that, he looks at you and I. And so he doesn't ask us, hey, I'm going to be kind to you. I'm going to give you a great summer vacation with your family, or I'm going to give you a great fall, but I want something in return. There's nothing that God doesn't have that he needs from us. So when we experience that blessing, when we experience those days of peace, I would say that should cause us to say, wow, I have no business enjoying this. I don't deserve this. Thank you. Create an attitude of thankfulness in us. So let's continue in Jephthah's story here. We will come back to his vow. Verse 32. This is a complex battle narrative. So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. Great. Thanks, guys. I want numbers and strategies and tactics. Nope. So they win, and then they pursue them back to their cities. They take 20 cities, and the Ammonites are driven out of Israel. All right, so Jephthah, this guy, he's got a kind of an undesirable background. He's looked down on by his peers, his brothers. He's driven out. He's called back in, but it's basically called back in to be used by them. He makes this vow, and God gives him the victory. So this guy, who is a ruffian maybe, is the one that God uses to deliver his people. All right, so here's the climax of Jephthah's story. Verse 34. Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah. You ready? And behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. You know, my wife is not in the room. Her father, every time their pastor in their church in Syracuse cries a lot, and every time her dad is like, stop crying, grow up. This was basically a throwaway, like kind of a funny statement in the past, but now that I have a child, it means so much more. His daughter comes out. Holy crap. As soon as he sees her, he tears his clothes and says, "Alas, my daughter, I made a dumb vow, and now I'm going to have to break it." No, he doesn't. "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of great trouble, for I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow." She said to him, "My father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites." Oh, his daughter, clearly she is no fool. She is more honorable than he. And she says, "It's okay. Do what you have to do." Now, I don't know what, I think I know what would have been the correct response from Jephthah here. I think if it's a choice between breaking your vow or human sacrifice, which is also condemned for obvious reasons, I think breaking the vow would be the better choice. But she says this, "Let this thing be done for me. Leave me alone for 2 months, that I may go up and down on the mountains and weep for my virginity, I and my companions." So he said, "Go," and she went away for 2 months, she and her friends. And at the end of 2 months, verse 39, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. So, there's the ending. So, I think when I was growing up, I heard an alternate interpretation of this, that she was like donated to a convent to be they didn't have nuns in convents back then, but she was donated to like a temple to be something like that. I think that is pastors probably trying to smooth over this ugly story. I don't think there's reason to say that anything other than this girl is sacrificed is correct. Her father makes an incredibly foolish promise and then doubles down on it. And his only child, he kills, murders. So Jephthah has a little bit more story. Unfortunately, it's not going to necessarily get better. In chapter 12, I will just summarize. Another tribe of Israelites come to him and says, "Bro, when we were going out to fight, you didn't ask us for your help. We wanted to go out and fight as well." Jephthah's response is, "Bro, I did call you out to fight and you didn't come, so I went without them." So they say, "We're going to burn your house over you with fire," which is an escalation, I think. So that's their conflict, and so they go to fight. And Jephthah wins again, and this time the Ephraimites, their opponents, are stuck on the wrong side of the river. So their home is on one side of the river, they're on the other side, and Jephthah's men have the river crossings. And so they're trying to cross over, and Jephthah's men ask them to say the word Shibboleth, and for whatever reason, I would love to know, they can't pronounce the word correctly, and so if they can't pronounce the word correctly, they kill them on the spot. Which, I don't want this to become a humorous thing, but can you imagine like a line of people, you're all in like Ephraimite uniforms, you all look the same, you know, you've got your Ephraimite flags in your hand, and you see the guy, ooh, and then you step forward, Shibboleth, ooh, and then just like next. Anyway, it's not very funny. These stories are so dark, just because let's understand that this is a lot of his countrymen, even if it wasn't, but thousands of Israelites are killing Israelites here. So that's the end of Jephthah's story. So he judges for 6 years, and then he dies, and the next judge will take over. Okay, so Jephthah, his story spirals out of control. Like, when you start looking at him, he has all of the markers of this redemption arc. You have this guy who's kind of an outcast. Think about one of my favorite characters in fiction is Aragorn. So in The Lord of the Rings, that may go over some of your heads, but he's this guy who is this outcast. He's a ranger. He lives out in the wild. He's probably doesn't shower, not very desirable. But by the end of the story, he's the king of the main people. I can't just give all these names. People are going to be confused. But he changes from this nobody to this incredibly important guy. And Jephthah his story is set on that marker. He's a nobody. He's brought in. Soon he's over Gilead. He has this great victory. And then his story ends so awfully because he makes these foolish vows. And I don't know if the last part could be helped. So let's take 3 thoughts from this. First, let us not take a story like this as a license to do evil. So you should never say, because this guy in the Bible did this, therefore I'm going to act this way. Right? So Jephthah acts in a terrible way, kills his daughter, makes a foolish vow. Okay? That should not lead to disappointment either. Like, why is the Bible giving me this story? These stories should point us to Jesus. Guys, when we're reading this should drive us to look to somebody better. Guys, we need better than Jephthah. We need better than Barak. We need better than Samson next week. We need somebody who can be a leader who is perfect and holy. And that should point us to the Gospels. The Gospels, 4 stories, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Many of us are familiar with the stories. You've probably read the stories in the Gospels, Jesus' interactions with people, things he says, things he does so many times. Why are they important? They're important because Jesus was living the life that we are called to live. He didn't fail like you and I fail. He didn't sin like you and I sin. He ran that race of life all the way to the end perfectly. And the more that we look to him, the more that we read, man, what's this next chapter? How did Jesus deal with these people? How did Jesus deal with these people? The more than you and I have a blueprint for what our lives should look like. There's a lot of amazing things to learn from these Old Testament stories, characters who do amazing things. Jephthah is considered a man of faith, but he also fails a lot. And these should drive us to our true Savior, Jesus, who didn't fail, and who is the ultimate one that not only made us right with the Father, is also someone that has called us to follow him. Okay, second, importance of living wisely. Jephthah has so much to offer, and he throws it away with foolish decisions. Part of he didn't have the scriptures like we do. Like, we are blessed to, we are blessed to have this. He had probably none of it, very little of it. We can look at these characters and learn from them. We can look from the teachings of the prophets and of Christ and the apostles and learn from them. We can read the Proverbs and see, what does a life of following Jesus look like? So that also means that we have no excuses. Coming here Sunday mornings is awesome. It's great. I love seeing each one of you. But this is not enough to give each one of us a life of growing. That is up to each one of you personally. Like, if we want to grow, like, I want to grow. I want to be a better man next year than I am. I want to look at this year and be like, ugh, why did people want anything to do with me? Like, I hope that that's the way I will feel. That only comes from learning from following people who are wise and then making wise decisions. And we are blessed to have something that people have not had for thousands of years. We have God's Word in our hands, in abundance. Probably most of you have more Bibles in your house than you have people. Right? But lastly, and I'm 5 minutes short, darn it. Well, lastly, we will fail, and all of you have failed. I think I could probably say that. When those times come, when you feel guilty, when you fail, you fall on your face, you sin, you're foolish, you say the angry thing, you make the wrong decision, remember these guys. Jephthah is in that list of people of faith. Those verses that I read earlier from Hebrews, Jephthah is listed with Samson, with Gideon, with all these characters who did a lot of really bad stuff. David is the king that is held up on a pedestal all throughout the Old Testament. The ending of David's life was awful. He had terrible relationships with his kids. He had affairs. He killed people. That's David. And yet David is considered the man that is the ideal human king because he was following God. Guys, we're going to fail, right? Jephthah killed his daughter. That's awful. There's still room for grace. So if there are times where you feel unworthy, you're like, why would God want to use me? One, point to these stories. If Jephthah could murder his daughter and still be considered a man of faith, I assume most of you are probably safe. It's funny. Hopefully, I won't assume. But, guys, that is what separates the message of Jesus from every other religion. Yes, all of us, let's make wise decisions. Let's be more like Jesus every day. But we're also going to fail. You're going to sin. You're going to make terrible decisions. Hopefully not too many of them. When those times come, and they probably come often, there is grace. We have a Savior who has set our relationship with God at the max. You can't get any more loved, and rest in that. So, there is Jephthah. Next week we're going to look at Samson, and that's a long story, so I don't know how we're going to condense all that into one time. But I would encourage you to check out the story of Samson so you're familiar with it. These people are not different than you and I. They're normal guys who make decisions. Sometimes they make great decisions. Sometimes they make bad decisions. And God does some really cool things through them. And the same God that ruled over them is the same God that is with us. He's even with us in a greater extent.